We'll talk about this much more in the coming weeks. Collaboration between XP Property and Property Ed, which is Tyler Newman's property education platform. We have launched the Development Mastermind. It's based on the school platform, which is by Alex Hormozy. If you want to scale your property development business to 7 or 8 figures and beyond, you need to be on this platform. We want people that are very serious, that have a good understanding of the industry. A project in itself might be very profitable, but if it doesn't spin the needle for our business and pick out enough physical value, because percentages are one thing, but actual monetary value is another thing, then it's not often worth doing. The stuff I'm going to be talking about today is from the bank that we bought about a month ago. The price that we purchased this for is, we think, a very good level. We purchased this bank for... The stuff that I'm going to be talking about today is from the bank that we bought about a month ago. So it's a mixed use scheme, commercial to residential conversion, and I'll get into the depths of that. If you want to know the inner workings of how some of our projects come about, how we structure them, how we fund them, how we find them, how we go through planning, all of that good stuff from start to finish, then stick around because I am going to be going through things in detail. But let's get into the juicy stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, the deal deep dives are definitely one of our highest rated and highest viewed videos in the past. If you haven't tuned in and seen some of those, you can go all the way back to episode 33, where we could do a deep dive on our St Andrew's Court Tame project. And then in season 2, number 4, and season 2, episode 35, we also go fully deep diving into our doctor's surgery conversion into 5 flats, which will be finished this month. So we'll probably do another deep dive at some point of all of these finished projects and compare them to what we set out to achieve in the first place. You know, often things don't go quite as you first planned. Sometimes they go better, sometimes they go worse. So it's good to review how projects have performed. Did they perform as expected? Did they not? What were the reasons for it? What can we learn? All that type of stuff. So if you want to go and watch some of our previous deep dives, head over to episode 33 or season 2, episode 35. So like I mentioned previously, I am going to be talking about the purchasing of this bank. So Jack is prolific when it comes to acquisitions. If you haven't checked out season 3, episode 10, how to buy more properties in 2025, the processes and secrets that he goes through to basically, we've bought a site every 4 weeks over the last 6 years. But this bank was brought to us by a local agent that we've got a very good relationship with. They happen to be in the office next to us in Henley-on-Thames. We built a really good relationship with them, and they said they had this opportunity. The owner we've built a really good relationship with. It turns out that the owner has bought a series of these Halifax banks. You'll probably see a lot of these types of high street banks coming on the market, or they have been coming on the market over the last couple of years. Retail is obviously dying. There's a lot of more of a move to more online presence. So they're stripping their assets. They're selling off some of the stock that they don't need. Obviously, a lot of these assets are massive overheads for banks. They're not actually used as much as they were. So it's a good opportunity typically for banks to get rid of some of this stock. And what happened with the High Street Bank in Abingdon is that the owner bought a series of them, but ultimately the leases on these properties were for a long time. I think they were 75-year leases. Now, the banks have to do something about that. They can either hold the asset, keep running down that time frame, and just hold on to it and just pay throughout the time frame the lease has left on it, or they can negotiate with the owners of the freehold properties, essentially pay themselves out of the lease. And that's what's happened. So the seller of our property bought loads of banks. He's negotiated with Halifax a surrender, effectively, where they paid him a good lump sum of money to get out of their leases. And ultimately then the price that we've purchased this for is, we think, a very good level. He was happy with it. He knows that he's also getting a good chunk of change from the actual lease surrender. That's the story behind the purchasing. We purchased this bank for £800,000. It's probably worth saying, and a bit of a spoiler right now, we have agreed a sale of the retail space at ground and lower ground floor for half of what we purchased it for. You know, we've effectively got a sale under offer, progressing through legals, where we're selling basically about 25% of the space for half of the cost that we paid for it. So obviously a great deal for us. We get that cash back into our bank straight away. And effectively we bought the rest of the 75% of the site for £400,000, which in an area where resale values are £450 to £500 a square foot. You know, we've got ourselves a good deal here where we can phase the project, which I'll come on to during the planning process. It's got lots of facets, lots of different exit strategies. And yeah, it was a really great purchase for us, so we're super excited to get progressing with it. How have we funded it? So this one is slightly different to what we normally do. We would typically get senior finance from a bank, and we would raise private investment from external parties. We would couple that together and we would purchase it on a bridge or a development facility of of some kind. With this one, we have actually managed to bring on an investment partner who is paying cash. So we bought it in cash, which saves all of the red tape with a bank, all of the legal fees that goes into having deeds of subordination, having a set of legal fees for your investor, a set of legal fees for the bank, and ultimately streamlines the whole process for us and reduces the cost in terms of arrangement fees and transactional costs of working with the bank. So it was a great opportunity with this one. It allowed us to bring in an investor that's going to buy it cash. And because we hope to achieve planning permission relatively soon for what we want to achieve, we've brought the investor in with the view that once we secure the planning approval, we will then redeem some of his loan by taking out that development facility to deliver the project. So we are buying cash. Our investor is bringing a certain amount of cash to start phase one of the works, which I'll come on to. And then once we've secured the planning approvals that we want, we can then refinance with a development finance facility with a bank and basically pay down a chunk of his original investment. So it works really, really well. In this situation, it is a loan type of investment. So that cash has come in on a loan basis. We've talked about in the past what the difference is between equity funding and debt. Equity, you're basically sharing the risk, sharing the reward, you're equal shareholders, and there's no interest coupon on that money coming in. Whereas when it's a loan investment, effectively that money is coming in, but there is a coupon being paid against that investment, an interest rate of return. This image on screen, for those that you are watching on YouTube, shows very, very eloquently the type of risk and return you can expect when working with development projects. So typically up to sort of 65, 70% of the main funding will be from the senior loan, which will be from the bank. You may well have a piece of mezzanine finance in there. So that's like a junior loan that sits behind the first charge lender, the first charge bank lender. And then the equity slice is kind of after that. So on the senior loan, you've got the lower risk because effectively, if they're only up to 65, 70% of the value of the asset, if they have to fire sell the property, the chances of that being sold for 25% less than what it's worth is very, very low. So their money is very, very secure. So their risk is lower. But because of that, their return is lower. So, with a bank, you're probably paying somewhere between, on a development facility, this is somewhere between 9 and 11% per year. Whereas if you are the equity piece or the mezzanine piece within the capital stack, which is what this is a capital stack, that is higher risk in terms of if we had to fire sell it, the equity in the mezzanine is the first chunk to be lost if it is being fire sold and sold at a value that's lower than what it's worth. So there's high returns upon that. So high risk, high returns, and then the bank are on the lower risk, lower return slice of the capital stack. But we, like I say, we bought this cash and we will be refinancing with a bank lender as and when we get planning permission through. So let's have a look at the full development appraisal. We are always open and transparent with these videos, and this was obviously a deep dive, so we are going to dive deep into it. Just quickly on the property itself. So this is a screenshot, I think, from Searchland or Land Insight, one of the other ones. This is the site that we are buying. It's highlighted in green. It's a commercial unit, and I'll bring up an image in a minute. But it's a commercial unit, a basement and lower ground floor. And then upstairs, there is 3 two-bed flats. To the rear, which is accessed off of the bank, which used to be toilets and staff facilities and basically the back end office. That is also 1,000 square feet basically of space to the rear of the site, accessed off the ground floor bank. So we have obviously we run XP Surveys, which is a measured building and topographical survey company. We tend to get 360 virtual tours created of every project that we buy, and this is what I'm showing on screen. So if you haven't used Matterport technology before, this is the benefit that it gives you. We've gone in with our scanners, we've scanned the whole site, and we now have the opportunity to basically look through the project, look through the site, share it with engineers, share it with architects. It's a fantastic tool to use when you're just starting out on a project to give to different stakeholders, show them the key information that they need to see without actually paying for a site visit. So if I had to call my engineer out to look on site, it's probably going to cost me 500-600 quid. Whereas I can send him this link and instantly he's got a much better idea and grasp of what the project looks like, what the key structural elements are. It's a massively beneficial thing to use for this Matterport 360 virtual tour. So if you're interested in getting a 360 tour, do drop us a comment down below or drop us an email. It's something that XP Surveys offers, and it generally starts from only about 150 quid. This size of project will be more than that, but a typical 3-bedroom house will be around the region of 150 quid. So this is the rear of the site. This is what I was talking about in terms of the back end office space with an undercroft underneath for about 6 parking spaces. You can see the building in the rear, which is the bank, and I'll go out to the front. So here it is. This is it. access off of the ground floor, bus stop right next door, and then 3 floors above, which is where the 3 2-bed flats are. So that's the general overview. Give you a quick sort of walk through some of the spaces. Let's take a look in this top floor. This is one of the 2-bedroom flats. These have actually relatively recently been refurbished, to be honest. So when we went to site last week and was looking at how much work we want to do, I mean, there's actually, we're going to be stripping out the kitchen. We're going to be turning the 2 beds into 3 beds. We are going to be able to keep some of the floor finishes and some of the new heating systems and all that sort of stuff, which is great. It saves us money. If you've got any questions, do drop them down below. Let's dive into the actual development appraisal. Why did we buy this? We're not going to buy something without knowing there is a decent return. This is our development appraisal software. Some of you would have seen this before. Talking you through this, we're buying it for £800,000. All in all, in terms of stamp duties, sourcing fees, legal fees, etc., we're going to be all in for about 870 grand. From a planning and design perspective, then we look at how much we need to spend on that phase. So topo and measured building survey, architects, planning consultants, third-party professionals, heritage consultants. So it is a listed building. That's something I probably should have said already. It's a grade 2 listed building. Certainly the front of the building was originally the grade 2 listed section, but the rear of the site is what's known as curtilage listed. So it's in the same title, it's connected to the grade 2 listed building, and by default that rear of the site, even as ugly as it is, as there is sort of lack of any type of heritage value at the rear of the site, unfortunately it gets called into curtilage heritage listed section, which is really only the front of the building. I mean, this looks like it was built in probably the 80s, to be honest, and there's no heritage value in it at all, but because it's curtilage listed, it makes things a little bit more difficult for us. So when we come to the detailed design and the planning, we're going to be looking, normally we like to get these figures down to about 10 to 12%. So if your figures from a REBA stage 0 to 4, which is like planning, feasibility, detailed design, building regulations, up to the point in which you've got a package of tender documentation to go out to contractors with, we want to be 10 to 12% is like the average. If you're at 6%, certainly for this size of project anyway, you probably haven't factored in enough money for your consultants. We're going to need heritage consultants, SAP assessors, energy assessors, travel statements, ecology surveys, all of these extra things add up. And ultimately, you're typically around about 10 to 12% of construction value when you are looking at these types of consultants at the front end. Then we come into our build phase, and our build costs for this are just shy of £1 million when you factor in finishes and fittings, utilities, development management fees, building warranties, building control, all of that good stuff. Some of you will be, looking at this and looking at £140 a square foot and thinking either that's really expensive or either that's really cheap, depending on where you live. But ultimately, we strip out all of our FF&E into a separate line item. So when you factor in everything as a blended pound per square foot cost in terms of the works that we anticipate doing within this property, we are about £150 per square foot based on the residential space that we're creating. And that's where a lot of our commercial conversion costs seem to be coming in at, generally between 140 and 160. The benefit we have with this project is, like I showed you in the 360 tour, 2 of the floors at the front are in pretty good nick. So it's more of a cosmetic upgrade more so than stripping everything back to red brick. Loads of structural changes. There isn't any of that in the front part of the building, whereas at the rear it is a little bit more work to do, and that's why we've got the best part of 160 and £180 a square foot for those segments to the rear of the property. So we generally break this down to the different segments. We always start with the schedule of accommodation. So that is what you see on the right hand side here. You've got the existing schedule of accommodation showing the existing retail at ground, basement, and then the first floor offices to the rear. And then you've got the flats, which are the 2-bed flats to the front of the property. So when we were looking at what we thought the existing value is based on a potential commercial yield for the areas that are commercial, we think we were getting this at a decent discount. If that was tenanted from a commercial perspective and the flats were tenanted at a relatively modest rent from an AST perspective, we valued the site up at around about £1.5 million. So we feel like we're getting it cheap. Obviously, with no commercial tenant in place and vacant possession, the commercial side of the property is worth way less than what we are showing here. So with a tenant in place, yes, it can value up a lot more, but without a tenant in place, the value of the vacant possession of that building, it could take you 2 years to find a new commercial tenant for the space, for example. So you can't really value it up as much as we have. Then the proposed schedule of accommodation. So this is what we're anticipating getting out of it as our ultimate goal, basically. We are to talk you through what we're trying to do, going back to this 360 virtual tour. So we're looking at taking up this rear part of the building to match the 3rd story building to the left, adding an extra flat up in that new roof space, converting the offices to the rear of the site, and then adding another studio flat down at ground floor level and reducing the amount of parking in the undercroft to just bins, bikes, and studio flat. I'll just show you inside here because I didn't show you. But yeah, this is what it looks like in the undercroft. Pretty disgusting, to be honest. I'm not really sure how anyone's parking 6 cars in this space with all of the columns and all the structural work. But ultimately, in this section here at the front of the property, we're going to be turning this into a studio flat. We'll have a 2-bed above, 1 bed at a new floor level, and then a 3-bed within the middle section, which is there's quite a lot of space in between the main front of the building and the rear section of the building that we can turn into a 3-bed flat. So that's the end goal. Ultimately, we see this as being about a 2.75 million gross development value scheme. And then when you work back all of the figures that I started talking through, so all these build costs come to about £1 million. Then you've got community infrastructure levy of about £36,000. We'll come on to kind of the hold strategy and the sales strategy, but ultimately, if this was a finance lender looking at this, they would want to see some sales costs in there as if they had to sell it, and they'd expect to see those figures in there, assuming that everything gets sold and they get their money back. You'll notice as we go through this development appraisal, under all of the various headings, we've got timeframes expected for those sections. So pre-planning 2 months, detailed design 2 months, strip out demolition and pre-commencement, so enabling works to get on site an extra 2 months, and then total build cost once we get stuck into it will be about 8 months. This project is slightly more difficult because ultimately it's a phased approach, and there's too many moving parts really to plan out one program of works within one set time frame. And what I mean by that is that we will be focusing on the front 3 residential units above the retail first. So we'll be looking to convert those 3 2-beds into 3 3-beds as the first phase of work. So get those done, get the cosmetic upgrades finished, new kitchens, bathrooms, flooring, get them rented out as soon as possible so that we've got an income generating part of the building that is complete as fast as we possibly can, get the retail unit sold to the new tenant, new buyer, and then focus on the rear of the site. So get it income generating, sell off half of the value that we bought it for, and then we can explore and push as much as we possibly can the planning permissions to the rear for the 4 flats that I spoke about in the schedule of accommodation. Then going down to the finance. So we have various ways in which we review this. You know, if it was an equity partnership, we'd look at a different scenario compared to if it's a loan investment coming in, and then if it's a cash on cash return. In terms of our current figures, our cash on cash return on this would be about 26% on gross development value, about 36% on cost. That's the crux of the appraisal. Very quickly, purchase price including transactional costs about 875 grand. We're in about £1 million of dev costs, including all of the design work, the build, the warranties, the third-party professionals, the statutory SIL and planning permission costs, and all that sort of stuff. An estimated amount of about 160 grand in terms of cost of finance. There's some sales costs in there if we did go down that route, leading to total costs of about 2.2 million, gross development value of about 2.75 million, which leaves our net profit in at around 550 grand, basically, which is a decent chunk, hits the criteria of what we're looking for from a development business. And what we tend to do is look at the return to XP property, because ultimately a project in itself might be very profitable, but if it doesn't spin the needle for our business and kick out enough physical value, i.e. monetary value, because percentages are one thing, but actual monetary value is another thing, then it's not often worth doing. And this one, on the face of it, doesn't quite hit the £200,000 annual return per project per year criteria that we set. But when I come on to what we're doing with this in terms of holding it or selling it, you'll understand why it is something that would be worth doing for us. One of the things we learned from a very senior person at actually Shawbrook Bank is stress testing. This is something that we've introduced in all of our development appraisals. So we stress test a gross development value dropping by 10%, a build cost increasing by 15%. And then if things really kick off and we get huge delays and we have to service interest and things get delayed, and obviously the interest cost racks up quite considerably once you get to the end of a project where you're holding all of that debt. If things get delayed by 12 months, then we like to look at the doomsday scenario of all those things happening. And if all those things happen and you're still coming out making a small profit or breaking even, that's typically the level that we like to offer as a starting point for the project. So you can see here we've stress tested everything. Even if the doomsday scenario happens, we're still washing our face and coming out with a small profit. But ultimately, you'd like to think that not all of those things happen at once, but it is possible. Cool. So let's talk planning. And I mentioned a little bit about the process, but in terms of where we hope to end up. But there's obviously a few steps that we need to go through to get to that point. And I mentioned it's a phased project. It's quite complicated in terms of what we're going to be doing here. And we've already submitted a few applications and had some successes and some failures, to be honest. So let's talk about the failures first. We were relatively cheeky. We put in a Class MA application to convert the rear of the site into 2 residential units. And that fell by the wayside and got rejected, mainly because the rear of the site was classified as curtilage listed, and Class MA doesn't apply to that. Now, you may ask why we bothered. The response to that I'd have is that we've pushed our luck with these types of things in the past. We've managed to argue the toss that the rear of the site has direct access onto the street behind, its own sort of segment of the building. It's clearly not got any heritage value. It's only really connected by, one floor at the point at which it has the stairs up to the office to the rear. So we thought we'd push our luck, see if we can get a Class MA application through. But lo and behold, they didn't back down on the fact that it was curtilage listed, and they rejected it. The backup for that is the Class G. So for those that aren't aware of what Class G looks like, so Class MA, just going back on that, is commercial to residential conversion. So if you've got a use class E type of building, that's retail, that's office, that's light industrial, that's financial services. There's lots of Class E retail spaces that are prime to convert under Class MA into C3 residential use. If you want to check out some of our other videos, you'll see huge amounts of projects where we have done that, like St Andrew's Court, like the old Maltings, like a deep dive we did on the doctor's surgery conversion. They were all Class MA to C3 residential use conversions, office to residential. Class G is very similar. Class G is there to convert upper levels of Class E retail space into a maximum of 2 flats. Now, you might be looking at that image on the right-hand side and thinking, well, there's 3 floors above the retail, and you've already said that there's 3 2-bed flats. So they're already in residential use above the retail space. But again, we're being slightly cheeky and pushing our luck in terms of the fact that the criteria is clearly set out. If it's ancillary space and it's connected to the retail space on first floor, then it's Class G. Just because our office space that's ancillary to the retail is to the rear of the property shouldn't change the Class G classification, because it's still ancillary space, it's still accessed and connected to the retail, and it's still at the upper levels. So it's a bit grey, but ultimately, from a checklist perspective, we don't see any reason why they can refuse it based on the Class G process. And what that does is give us a fallback position. So instead of going down the full planning application route, where we're having to submit all sorts of different applications, submissions, reports, and running the full planning application process, we're utilizing Class G, which has a time frame of 56 days. We don't have to submit all of those reports. We only have to submit a certain number of them, which is daylight, travel, contamination, flood risk, noise assessments. So yeah, we're reducing our sort of costs up front and submitting the Class G to then give us a fallback position, so that when we go in with our full planning application, we've already established the change of use from Class E to C3, and we are then going in to maximize the rest of the work via a full planning application to the rear. That full planning application will be the upwards airspace extension to match the 3 stories of the buildings locally, converting part of that space into an extra flat, then converting the ground floor car parking space into a studio flat, to basically make 4 flats to the rear. Some people that haven't worked on grade 2 listed buildings or listed buildings in the past, listed building consent is different to planning approval. You can get listed building consent and not get planning approval, and you can get planning approval and not get listed building consent. So they're 2 separate applications, they're 2 separate processes. With listed building consent, you have to speak to the heritage officers within the council. They'll often want to come out and do a site inspection. You'll have your own heritage consultant that's working with you to present the case of what you're trying to achieve. The reality of this property, for example, is that a lot of the historic character of this property has already been lost. There's no deep skirtings, there's no ornate cornicing, there's no original doors, all of that is gone already. The only real thing that's left is these windows at the front, which are nice sliding sash windows, single glazed original windows, which we'll have to retain. We'll be refurbishing them, And then we'll also be adding secondary glazing internally to help with the thermal efficiency and also the sound insulation from the main road as well. The listed building consent is different from a full planning process. So this is a commercial mixed use scheme, and we will be converting parts of that commercial space into residential. So I've got a few top tips which I've pulled from some other presentations I've done in the past, just to give you some of the key things that you should be focusing on when converting this type of property. And it's the key things that we've had issues with in the past, and you will continuously have issues with going forward, because there's a huge amount of scrutiny now from building control to focus on a lot of this stuff. And starting with the main biggest one, which is the fire strategy. Make sure you've got a fire engineer on board as early as possible. The likelihood is that if it isn't already compartmentalized between the commercial space and the residential space, and even between the residential space, they're going to want you to upgrade it to 60-minute fire resistance. So if there's a fire down in that retail space, the last thing you want to do is have that impact the residential tenants on the first floor, for example. So you are likely going to have to upgrade the fire compartments, which means the walls and the floors surrounding each of the individual flats and commercial units with 60-minute fire resistant construction. So that often means 2 layers of fire line plasterboard, taped and skimmed. Acoustic separation is another one. If it wasn't a newsagent going in and it was a restaurant where it's quite noisy, you want to make sure that your tenants in the first floor residential flats don't hear the conversations of all the people sat down in the restaurant eating. You need to have the appropriate acoustic separation between floors and walls. So making sure that you've got rock wool, mineral wool insulation between the floor joists, that you are separating some of the floor structure with dense material or hanging ceilings off of the floor, whereby it helps to reduce the impact noise. So if you've got people stomping around upstairs, if you separate the ceiling from that floor by hangers, those hangers are going to deaden that impact noise of people walking around and reduce the sound transfer between those places. Structure is obviously key. You know, if you're knocking things around, especially in listed buildings, you need to get your structural engineer to advise, and you need to get your heritage consultant to look at it and make a planning application for that listed building consent. So structure is prevalent in every project, but ultimately when you're converting existing buildings, you're probably going to want to knock a few things around. So yeah, make sure you've got a good structural engineer on board. Drainage, uncovering drainage runs is so fundamental. Once you get a site, you can strip things out and you can start to see where all of the drainage runs goes. That's a really good opportunity then to get your architect on board, to get your structural engineer on board. If you've got a mechanical and electrical and plumbing engineer on board, then obviously it's a great opportunity to get them out and take a look at where all of the runs go and make proper assumptions within your detailed design, so that you're not waiting for the contractor to get on site and then say, oh, I didn't expect it to go here because it wasn't uncovered. We assumed it was going from X to Y and it's going from A to B. There's a variation of £2,000 because we need to do X, Y, and Z to make that right. Utilities is a massive one, and this is something we bang on all the time about, and making sure that you're getting a utilities consultant on board ASAP. You're submitting your applications to Thames Water, to UKPN, to Cadent Gas, to whoever it is that provides the utilities, and starting that process ASAP within your program. Space efficiency is key, and actually this is some early sketches that I did for this scheme. So this is a good insight actually in terms of when we're looking at opportunities and Jack's looking at opportunities, it'll often come over to me from a sketch plan perspective to put a more architectural hat on, a more kind of, okay, as property developer, what are we going to do with this site? I will sketch up some ideas of where I expect this project to go, and then Jack and Aaron and the team can start putting some figures together based on that analysis. So you can see here in orange, this is the ground floor and basement level retail space which we're carving off. The green is the new studio flat that I expect to get. I've highlighted some of the key constraints. So there's a fire escape from the neighbouring property that has access rights across our car park to give means of escape to their unit, making sure that we're maintaining some of the fire routes out. And then at first floor level, this is part of the conversion that we're looking to do within the existing office space. This is the central section again, which is the toilets and some of the other ancillary meeting space that we're going to be converting into a 3-bed flat. And then this pink one up the top here is the additional 2-bedroom flat that I think we can get in the airspace, or I thought we could get in the airspace when I was looking at this early on. And then the bits in yellow are the existing 2-bedroom flats that we're going to be converting into 3-bed HMOs. So there'll be 3-bed HMOs giving us 9 lettable rooms at an average rent of about £800 a month. That part of the building will be a really good cash cow for us. So long-term strategy, what are we doing with this? I touched a little bit on it earlier, but are we going to sell or are we going to hold this? I've mentioned we're selling the retail space. we're getting back half our value from very early on by selling that retail space off. I've mentioned the rentable rooms in those front 3-bed HMOs. That's going to be a bit of a cash cow for us longer term. So we will be holding that into our rental portfolio, and it will go over to Central Suites, which is Jack's business, to manage those assets amongst some of the other ones we've got locally. And then the likelihood is that the rear flats that we'll be creating, we will probably sell at least 3 of those 4. The only one that we might keep is the 3-bedroom in the middle, which again will turn into a HMO and ultimately then take it from 9 bedrooms to 12 bedrooms on site and get some equity back, some cash back to use on the next projects by selling the other 3 flats to recoup some of that capital. So ultimately where we hope to end up is holding either 9 HMO bedrooms or 12 HMO bedrooms, selling off the retail space, selling at least 3 new 1 and 2 bedroom flats. That's the strategy with this bank. Have we got building control sign off at St Andrew's Court? Again and again and again. Yes and no. We have verbal agreement of sign off for flats 5 and 6, which is what we were waiting on. As of now, I don't actually have the certificates yet. They might be in my inbox, but we've been promised by close of play we will have them because we've got sales completions happening next Tuesday. So it's cutting it a bit fine, but we should achieve full building control sign off for phase 1 this afternoon, which will be, I might actually have a beer after getting that. I mentioned we have our first sale in Tame. This is it. This is flat 1 now formally sold, and we've got 3 more sales going through next week. And I just wanted to mention about how making a first impression for your sales process is really important. Having buyers that are happy and they're super excited to get into their new properties and new homes is such a great feeling. And there's a few things that I've learned from the Berkeley Group and other sales directors at other large London property developers, where we're trying to replicate some of that good stuff within what we do. And one of those things being this lovely ribbon that we put on the front doors when we meet the new buyers at their new home. So making sure that first impression as they approach the door, it's cool. No one else does it. It's a really nice touch, together with either the hamper or the bottle of champagne or whatever it may be within their property, to again have an amazing first impression. I remember the first property that I bought, it was with Halifax actually, about 12 years ago. And when I moved in, there was a hamper of wines and cheeses and tape measures and little toolkits for hanging up pictures and this sort of stuff. And I remember that. It was one of the first impressions that I have, and it stuck with me. And I think if you can do that as a property developer, it's going to benefit you in the long run, because people buying your assets, buying your properties, are going to remember you. We also provide home user guides. So this is a sort of leather-bound document of all the key information about their property, how to use the heating, where the local pharmacy is, where they can get keys cut, where all of that good stuff that they need to know about how to service their boilers and the fire strategy, all that sort of stuff is contained within these home user guides. And that is something that we also make sure is very, very accessible for them. We will email this information as well, so they've got links to a Google Drive folder where they can find all of the operation manuals and stuff for their ovens and all that type of stuff as well. So little touches, but we think these go quite a long way. We'll talk about this much more in the coming weeks, but I just wanted to touch on the collaboration between XP Property and Property Ed, which is Tyler Newman's property education platform. We have launched and will be launching a lot more in the next couple of weeks, the Development Mastermind. It's based on the school platform, which is by Alex Hormozy, and we've already done a number of webinars and started creating a lot of content to go within the school platform. Ultimately, it's a 12-month program where if you want to start or scale your property development business to 7 or 8 figures and beyond, you need to be on this platform. You need to be on the calls that Jack and I are undertaking. You need to be within the community where people are throwing in their deals that they're looking to analyze, asking key questions about their projects that they're looking at. And ultimately, we are here to guide and help budding property developers that are already in the property space. So people like architects, civil engineers, structural engineers, party wall surveyors that are finding themselves at lunchtime looking on Rightmove at opportunities and wanting to jump ship and do their own thing. This is the mastermind course for you. Like I say, it's a 12-month program. If you're interested, there'll be a link, should be down below in the description, to register your interest, and one of our team will have a chat with you. It is an application process. We won't accept everyone. Like I say, you do have to have some sort of background in the industry. It's not worth our time to try and train up a school teacher that has absolutely no background in it. We want people that are very serious, that have a good understanding of the industry, want to take it to the next level. So do register your interest down below.